Okay, the Roman army purposes here. You should be able to identify why were Romans successful soldiers and armies, and identify what skills Romans and sometimes the soldiers had to develop develop their empire. Alright, so this is Rome's empire. Take a minute, pause the video, and read over what you see here. So, having looked at the empire, you can see that you would need substantial power to maintain and or develop that. And that power came in the form of the Roman soldier. And there were generally two types. There was the legionary on the left and the centurion. The legionary was the general soldier. He was the infantryman. And the guy on the right is a centurion, who was the leader of 100 men. And that's what we would call a company today. Both are highly trained. Both are loyal. Both are well equipped. You can see they have pilums and gladius and scutums. Generally in the movies we see the centurion mostly because he's flashy, and they wear this bit of ornamenture here obviously because it stands out, so you could find your officer, your leader, in the midst of chaos, much like the standard was built. Okay, so the army fought in a lot of different ways, and one way they did when it was close combat, hand to hand, they formed testudos. And you can see in this image, it's very much like a Roman turtle, and they would use their gladius to slash or jab at their enemies through their gaps. And this was a very formidable opponent because these shields were well made, and they were unified in their power. So a couple things to remember about the soldiers and the armies is that generally they didn't fight for glory. They didn't fight for anything except battle or pay in battle, and the hope to retire and receive a pension, which was payment for life, as well as land. So a lot of Roman soldiers, depending on the era, weren't allowed to marry, and they had to serve their time. And while I'll jump ahead a bit, they had to serve 25 years once the empire took over, and that was a change from 6 to 16, then it became 25. And why? Well, because they needed more soldiers. And so this is what we're looking at here. So when the soldiers went into combat, they didn't always face armies in wide open fields or forests. Sometimes they came to towns and they needed to occupy towns, big cities. And those people refused to give in or surrender. So the Romans were really good at developing what were called siege weapons. And these weapons had a lot of different purposes, a lot of different needs. And generally what you see on both sides are what these weapons are. I just wanted to show the see-through elements. So this is the tower, and this was used obviously with ladders, and you were able to push that right up to the walls of a very big fortress, and you could send your troops in that way, because when you had a 35-foot wall in front of you, you can't just spring shot the guys over. Other aspects were battling rams, which you would see right here. That's a battling ram. This would be a type of ram. You would see catapults right here. Right here. You would see ballistas like this. A ballista was almost like a crossbow. It could do some damage. And you would see things like testudos, which is actually a moving turtle. Sometimes they were called galleries. They all had various purposes, and the Romans were really good at using them at the right time and overwhelming their enemies. Of course, it would have just been wiser for you just to surrender, because the Romans would have treated you better than if you had held out. But that's history. So, as we talked about here with the Roman soldier, training was rigorous. When you signed up, you were at least 16 years old, and you were trained twice a day physically. And that doesn't include things like how to use your gladius and how to put on your uniform. It means like physically marching a fair amount of miles, sometimes up to 30 miles a day, carrying up to 60 pounds of equipment on your back. That's a substantial load. And you were trained over and over and over again until you knew what to do, even in chaos. And that's what made the Roman legions so incredible. So what is a legion? A legion is 6,000 legionnaires and centurions in one group. All right. So 6,000 legionnaires in one legion, and one army consisted of 28 legions. So if you did the math, that's over 130,000 men in one army. That's pretty substantial. As I just mentioned, the army was very well professional, very well trained. You chose to go into it, and you served for a long period of time. And there were rewards for this if you were able to go and survive. There were punishments if you did things like desert, or if your legion served and dishonored Rome. There were a lot of punishments, obviously, because usually a military is run on fear, and Rome was no different. So if you deserted, you could be executed. If your legion did not perform well, they could use one effort where they would kill every 10th man to send the message of you better do better. So the Romans, you didn't mess around with them. They were not all unicorns and butterflies. But, so we talked about this. The army was important, and it wasn't just important because it protected Rome, but it expanded the Rome. And the other thing it did was it provided the empire with skills, and it used them to help the empire grow and maintain economically. And that's what an empire does. An empire is all about money. So, the first aspect of an empire is the roads. And Rome's roads still stand today, believe it or not. And you can see on the right a graphic of how the Rome was traditionally built. Usually they dug down into the ground with rubble, and then they layered it. Flat slabs of rock with concrete and gravel crushed up on top. They used drainage on the side, and then they'd use flat paver stones with curbstones to kind of help maintain it. These roads were so well built that they maintain today. Now this is obviously a much older road that is in pretty bad standing, but this was a picture of Ostia's road that connects to Rome, and this is out by the Mediterranean, and you could very much walk over this. It was bumpy, but that's because it hasn't been used. There are other elements of the roads that are still in use today, one of them being the Appian Way out of Rome. So another aspect of Romans learned was bridge building and mining. In fact, each soldier wasn't just given a pila and a gladius, but they were also issued a shovel, because that's one aspect of what you had to do. And one of the aspects they had to do was build bridges, whether it was over valleys, whether it was over rivers. And this is a Roman bridge built over the Tiber. And while some bridges were built out of wood, those that survived today, were built out of stone. And that stone was mined by Romans. So mining is obviously very important, and the Romans were really good at this too. They would go after things like lead, silver, copper, even gold, and they'd use them for weapons, food service, if you wanted plates or cups, plumbing, because they had heated water, and even coins. Take a minute, read over this passage, and then answer that question. Why were coins helpful to the emperors? Pause it, and then play it again. Alright, so hopefully you realize that the coins were important because each emperor was able to put their own face on it, and for many Romans, that was the only time they ever saw what their emperor looked like. So the next aspect that Romans were really good at were building aqueducts. And this is the Pont du Gard in southern France. Having been there, it's quite beautiful. And it's really hard to understand what an aqueduct does, except that it moves water from one place to another. And it moves it in such small increments. So usually it would start up in the mountains, and the aqueduct would come down, and it would gradually decrease, sometimes inches, only inches over miles. And so you have to be really good at using math, trigonometry, and engineering skills to build and carve out and make perfect archways. And the Romans did this, and this is one example. And the water was used, obviously, for towns to provide water for those who were wealthy, and some wealthy Romans actually had water from aqueducts go directly to their homes, which was pretty cool. And then each city had its own bathhouse. It was a public bath where people could congregate, could take showers, could socialize, and aqueducts usually fed those areas as well. So congratulations, you have served your 25 years. You have helped build aqueducts and Roman roads. You have done everything to make Rome proud. You weren't a Roman citizen before. You were from Gaul or Spain or Egypt or Dacia. So instead what happens is that you get a recognition of your servitude. And what that happens is that when you are retired, you get these plaques. And this is an example of plates that were found, and it shows the service, it shows the individual's name, and you can see right here. Before retirement, this individual, Gemellus, was serving in Britain as a non-commissioned officer in the 1st Campanian Regiment of Pannonian Horse. So they were cavalry. He must have returned home to Pannonia, as the document was found at the ancient site of Brigeccio on the Danube. The Danube is in Eastern Europe. So this soldier was not a citizen. He went and fought in Britain, and then he came home, and he had these plates as proof that he was a soldier, a former soldier, and he was entitled to all the perks of being a retired soldier. So how did the army hold the empire together? What did the army do? You should be able to answer that question now. Think about it. They built roads. They mined for material. They improved water access. They made sure that everyone had plenty of it. They had materials such as lead to eat off of, coins to trade. Rome did more than just provide, the army did more than just provide security. They provided the glue that held the empire together. All right?